And tell me what you did on the Suwannee.
Well, I was better known as a deck ape, which means you're in the deck force. Now, in the deck force, we wear a lot of different hats. First of all, the main job is guns on the ship for defense. We also do cleaning details, meaning passageways and officers' country, our own compartments. If a ship comes alongside, we're involved with lines. At one time, we had line right on the bow of the ship, and then they decided they could keep them apart, so they didn't have to put a line. You go on working parties that bring stores. You paint the ship. We call it the skin. You paint the outside of the ship, that's the skin. And one time, we did paint the Suwannee in one day. It's over 500 feet long. We had our executive officer, I don't know his proper name. I always call him Smiley.
Yeah.
Smiley Van Mater.
Yeah.
And he got first, second division up on the bow. And he said, we're going to be in port 3 days, but we have to paint the ship. We painted that ship in one day so we could get our beer. And I mean, that's a lot of painting. And when we dropped the anchor, there was guys getting on the stages because we were rigging the stages while we were coming into port. Well, we got our beer. That's kind of exactly was.
What did you do, Grandpa?
I was in the deck can for 2 weeks, and I didn't like it at all. So I read a bulletin that said the chaplain was looking for an assistant that would be in charge of the library and do yeoman work. And I applied for it, and when he found out that I could lead the singing also, he chose me to be the one that was his assistant. And of course I stayed there with Lieutenant Commander McClellan for 3 months, and then Father Walsh came aboard as our chaplain, and I was with him for 3 months. And an opening in the we picked up VC 60, Squadron 60, and one of their yeomen was having some mental problems. They sent him back, and I was chosen to replace him on detached duty for the next 11 months. And then after that, I worked in the executive officer and the captain's office.
Tell me how you spent the morning of October, the days of the 24th, the 25th, and 26th, 1944.
Well, on the 24th was the first day that the Suwannee got hit by suicide planes. Now, we went to battle stations, and at that time, my job was 1 hour on lookout, 1 hour on the gun, and one back on lookout, and 1 hour on the gun. That's 4 hours. We worked 4 hours on, 8 hours off. One gun, ran a clock, even in Pearl Harbor. When we come back after the war, we did it. That time, unidentified planes came, and before I left the lookout, I got relieved by the clerks in the ship's office. The 3 planes that were above us, and our 40s couldn't reach them. And we were at battle station. They were firing at them, but our 40s couldn't reach them. The 2 5-inch we had were underneath the hangar deck. They didn't have a very good elevation at all, 17 or maybe 19 degrees. I got relieved. We had a pole to slide down. And sliding down the pole, the poor signalman was reaching in to get a flag, and I come down on his shoulders. So I had a lot of words from him running down a catwalk. I crossed the flight deck. My particular job that day was to help the gunner's mate on the 20 millimeters. We had drums that on battle stations, they had 60 rounds of 20 millimeter. On target, they had 20. And the closest I got to was to put the helmet on one sleeve and the K-Pock life jacket when she hit exactly where I ran across. So that was the one that wiped out most of the men on the ship because they were.
Been in that spot?
Well, no, the butchers, bakers, stewards, cooks, ordnance gang, V2, all their battle station was the after end of the hangar deck, and that's just about where he hit. And with the bomb that they had inside the airplane, like more or less like the pilot, was like sitting on it. And when he went through the flight deck, well, it blew up inside. Put the motor down, and on the main deck, we were a converted tanker to a carrier. But there wasn't much left of them wings because the hull was patched in 90 minutes flat. We were back in service in 90 minutes where we lost a lot of men, a lot.
What do you remember, Grandpa?
I was the guy that relieved him on lookout. That was
See,
my battle station.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Because I don't, it never happened.
Yeah.
It never happened any other time. It's
Yeah.
the only time it ever happened.
And that was my battle station. And the only thing between me and that plane as we saw him, and Cohen and I, who was one of the other yeomen, shared a 90-degree tangent of the, and we saw him at the same time and called down and told him where he was. He was a little past center of the port side of the ship and not quite directly overhead. And as we were telling them that, he made his roll, turned over, and about the time you were probably going down that
because
couch.
I wasn't
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
at no place but
yeah.
where I was putting my feet.
Yeah. And he dropped a bomb that went through, and then he followed that with the plane, and the bomb he was talking about that he was sitting on exploded between the hangar deck and the flight deck, and that's worth so much. And then the engine exploded. So we got 3 big explosions. That's we found out later after, and we still not know an official count of the dead. That day we buried I helped bury 169 that night, and then some more died, and we buried them with the group that was wounded the next day when we were hit and or killed. Don't think we buried any wounded ones, but we did. Our first job after I was called for by the chaplain because I'd worked with him, and he asked me to come and work in preparing the bodies. First of all, we'd go out and try to find the wounded, and then we'd come back, and we did that for 48 straight hours. And we made sure we buried them at night because of their, we didn't want Japanese submarines who might be in the area to notice how many we had lost, because we did. We finally found out that during those 2 days, 889 men were either killed, wounded, or missing in action. And I was wounded the second day. Burned a little the first day, but that wasn't significant.
What happened the second day?
Huh?
What happened the second day?
I had just been relieved. We had been on alert all morning, but just before noon, they allowed us, half of the men, to go down to relieve themselves and get something to eat and things of that nature. And the other half were to stay on, and we stayed on our station. And we were to be relieved in 15 minutes so that we could go down likewise. And I had not been relieved, and Vince Randazzo, who also, his watch station was a lookout, and he thought we were going off of alert, and so he came and relieved me early when he heard I had not been relieved. And I got almost to the mess hall when the second one hit. General quarters sounded, and I helped bury 2 of my best friends during that time.
There were a lot of fires after the...
Well, at the same time, when he mentioned about going down, I was in the mess hall.
Yeah.
And in the mess hall, all we heard was the 40s going, so naturally we took off back up again. But we didn't hear nothing but the guns firing. We were down in the mess hall.
Yeah.
And we took up to the guns, and That's when I got up to where I
Yeah.
was supposed to be. That's where we had, I don't know, it's between 11 and 13 planes burning, and
Yeah.
a lot of these still had ammunition in them. So it was
Yeah.
a pretty hot fire and dangerous.
Yeah.
And they had 320s on the bow. And between them, I know the pay officer, I think, was the one told them to abandon ship. Well, the fire was right on them.
Yeah.
It was, these
It was
20s
either
were
that or go
raised, But they
overboard.
were still below the flight deck. But there's 320s there with the crews, probably at least 6 men, you know, because you have a helper and a gunner. And then whoever else was forced up with the bow.
Several of the signalmen were.
Signalman, yeah. Anybody that was forced up there, he was one of the guys in the 1st Division said that you know, we had abandoned ship. Well, by then we were dead in the water. Our helmsman, Oscar, he brought her into a standstill when the captain's orders. The captain, he got pretty banged up too. He turned his back and he still got pretty banged up in the back. Shrapnel. Shrapnel was very bad, because you don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
The pilots were telling me that they stopped because the wind was kind of feeding
Yeah,
them.
well, that was
Yeah.
the main thing. He brought her in, and then of course the order was to stop because they brought the wind. He brought it in, and then he got blinded. But he brought it in where the wind was taking it sideways rather than back, and then of course they came to a complete stop. And we had one destroyer, DG, which had 2 sized destroyers in the Navy: a D destroyer, Fletcher class, and usually twin stacks and a single stack. They left us with 1 single stack, and that's it. We were dead in the water with him circling, constantly moving, with guys all over the water. The second
how
was the
long were y'all
worst
dead
for
in the
any.
water?
Pardon?
How long were y'all dead in the water?
I have no idea, because everybody was doing, and when all that fire, you know, you were doing whatever you had to do where you were, you know, because you couldn't really say who was up there fighting the fire, but there was a getting for it.
That's when the discipline that we had learned
it-
paid
yeah.
off,
That
because
you pitched in. I know anytime they had potential fires on a flight deck, the water we used salt water, but we used a dry chemical that went into a hopper and was added to the water, and that's what they call foam. And of course, they were all on the catwalks, and all the guns were on the catwalks. So anytime they had anything, the 1st Division and 2nd, which was second was on the starboard, first was on the port. We helped in, you know, if they had to move. The stuff came in 5-gallon cans. And we were right there, so naturally we're going to help them. They got a fire, you know. And,
he mentioned that first day we were back in, we're launching
90
and
minutes,
receiving
yeah.
planes
That's
in
how
90
we got the
minutes.
President's
And
citation. Because of that, the fact we put the ship back in service 90 minutes after she was hit.
I guess one of the hardest things I did was during that 90-minute period when we were ordered, we were picking up bodies and trying to find parts of bodies. And we were ordered to just start sweeping them to the side so they could begin launching, getting planes up and launching. It was awful hard for me to do, but I realized it had to be done. That the lives of many others depended on it, not just ours. And those guys were past helping, but it was rough.
When did you, in dealing with the memories of the war, I know, Grandpa, that you didn't remember some of these things until the first reunion you went to?
Most of the bad part I did not remember. I remembered and knew that I had been wounded, of course, but I did not, as you know, talk about it. Much of it had just gone into my subconscious, and I did not remember it, and I thank God I didn't. I had the horrible nightmares, still have them occasionally, and had it not been for the reunions, the year that I went through so much stress and all 4 or 5 years ago, I probably would be in institution somewhere today, because I had gotten enough of it talked out, and we had relived it, and we, thank goodness, most of the time we talk about the funny things, don't we, John?
Yeah.
And the
The
things that
finagling,
happened. But there was
a little
enough.
borrowing from the government,
Yeah.
you know, take care of the other part of the government, like us.
And we did.
Like MASH, a lot
Yeah.
a lot of that MASH is really true. A lot of that's true. Radar, for example, when he
My
was
favorite.
he was sending the Jeep home piece by piece.
Yeah.
I don't doubt we had guys doing that too.
I know we had guys
Yeah.
doing guns that
yeah.
way.
Yeah, they couldn't let us back in because they wouldn't be able to fight the war. We'd have everything shipped home.
Well, it seems like in talking with some of the men that y'all do use humor a lot.
Yeah, it helps.
You have
it helps.
to.
It's pretty hard to cry when you're laughing.
Yeah.
You know, you do cry sometimes when you are happy.
Yeah.
If something's really happy, you're laughing so damn hard you start crying. You know?
Yeah.
I think the worst part was not, to me, was like the third day after the first hit, third, when they asked for volunteers to help the medics with the guys. And I know one guy, all I know, remember the guy's name, he always skated. Every place he went, I'm going to skate here and I'm going to skate there. He was always, it's a term he used, I'm going to skate over here. I'm going to skate up to the head. He always used that term. And he asked me if he could have a smoke. I didn't smoke, and I went and asked, and the doctor says, yeah, he can smoke. He won't make the night out. That hurt. That hurt.
Yeah.
Or he wanted to drink of water. It's somebody. And said, yeah, you can't do nothing for him. And at that time, we used to put, like you put butter on your finger when you burned it. Well, we put grease. And they brought grease that looked just like Vaseline from the engine room to put on them, because that's what you put on. Today you put cold water, not ice water, you put cold water for burns. And you're putting that on them, putting gauze on them, and it's pretty hard. It helped there somebody brought a bottle around, and that kind of made it easier. You took some of the pain away, because you're trying to help somebody that somebody already told you you can't do nothing for them, so whatever they want, it's rough.
What would you like for people to remember about your service during the war?
Well, I would like to see more people come out on patriotic days and be a patriot. Run the flag up and show up for these parades. I don't care if it's a volunteer fire company, it's a parade, it's your country. And show a little more respect for it. And don't be so lazy and throwing trash out the windows and make it look so filthy looking.
Don't mess with Texas.
Yeah.
Well, they just better start learning what they learned at home and practice it, and what they learned in their churches and practice it. And talk to people, say hello to people. Bend a little bit. Don't be so stiff.
I think one of the things that I would want them to remember is that we were basically a group of 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. Some of the pilots and some of the officers were older, and of course some of the higher enlisted men. But I'd like to remember that we were just general, ordinary people trying to do a job we were ill prepared for. And yet, I'll never forget the pride that I feel in what we did and how we did it, and the love that we feel for each other. And we freely express it. I thought Randazzo had been dead for 45 years. First reunion, he was the first person I saw about 40 yards down the hall, and we met and embraced, and the first words out of both of our mouths was, "I love you." And that's, today, that's still the way we greet each other. And it's just a feeling there that I've never felt in any other group. Have you?
No, no.
Even in church,
No,
as close as
it's
we
close
get.
as I've ever been to anything. I worked 20 years in McGuire in a crash crew, and we've had a few problems, you know, but I think only the worst one we had was we were going out to practice one day, and a young military fellow, he rolled over the tanker and got burnt, and he died in the middle of the night. Now that was family then. For me, that was family, and that hurt. But it's things like that that brings you closer together, and you have to talk about it. I mean, you go to funerals to help the living and pay respect to the dead, and that's the way I was brought up.